All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to start by welcoming everyone to this webinar, what we're calling a SNAP webinar, which was organized very quickly because of what's happening on Capitol Hill. Just this morning, I got an email about one of our allies, an Afghan who is in the United States. And in that email, I learned about all the things he had done while he was in Afghanistan for the United States. And it was a reminder to me about why we do what we do here at No One Left Behind and why this moment is so important. The co-founder of No One Left Behind started the organization to serve and to keep America's promise to our allies. And we have a moment on Capitol Hill where the first time we've got major legislation in maybe as many as 10 years to serve those Afghan allies is going to be up for a vote as soon as this afternoon. So we decided to pull together this webinar where Advocacy Director Andrew Sullivan is going to brief all of you about what is happening. And you are encouraged and welcome to ask questions, but we hope to give some of the backstory that isn't making it into the newspapers and is not making it into the press. And at the end of this webinar, Andrew is going to share some ideas about how you can make a difference in what we're doing. We are counting on you to not just end your engagement with No One Left Behind at the end of this webinar, but when the webinar is finished, there'll be opportunity for you to do something. And that's what we're hoping you leave this webinar with. Number one is content, and number two is action. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our Director of Advocacy, Andrew Sullivan, who's going to explain what's happening on Capitol Hill. And again, we thank you for joining us, everyone.
Hey, thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it, and thank you everyone for joining today. I know this was last minute, but really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us for this important discussion. As many of you may know, the Emergency National Security Supplemental Act of 2024, it's really been in discussion for months now. The intent of the bill is to support allies in Eastern Europe, in the Levant, in the Western Pacific, and then also address challenges with southern border migration. Our position has been it is long past time to address the issues plaguing our Afghan allies following the U.S. withdrawal from the country. As you guys may know, we have two bills that we've endorsed and we've been working very hard on. That is the Afghan Adjustment Act and the Afghan Allies Protection Act. Both bills are bipartisan and bicameral, and although we would have loved to have seen them taken up and debated and passed into law months ago as standalone bills, unfortunately, that's not happened. Everyone has a sense of how Congress should function, and it looks like the schoolhouse rock version of passing a law. Every law is debated by itself, it's passed on its own merits, it's marked up in committee. Unfortunately, that does not reflect the current realities of our Congress. So with that in mind, we've been pushing to have the important provisions from Afghan Adjustment Act and Afghan Allies Protection Act pushed into whatever vehicle is moving. So that means trying to get them into the National Defense Bill. It means trying to get them into appropriations bills. It means, in this case, trying to get them into the supplemental appropriation bill that is currently being debated. On Sunday night, the Senate released the long-awaited text of the bill, and thankfully there are a lot of really, really strong provisions in there that support our Afghan allies. I know the majority of the news coverage talks about all of the issues at the southern border and what this bill does or does not do with the southern border. And I think there are a diverse range of perspectives on both sides of the aisle about that. But the coverage really has not focused on something really important, which is of the 370 pages in the bill, 60 of them are devoted to supporting our Afghan allies. It supports across multiple lines of effort. So it supports Afghan allies that are here domestically that arrived during the evacuation in August 2021. But it also makes some really important changes to our SIV program and to the U.S. RAP program for allies that are abroad, those that are stuck in Afghanistan or potentially may have escaped to a third country like Pakistan. We are very supportive of this bill, really supportive of the Afghan provisions within it. Our position has been it is long past time to stand with our Afghan allies. And so we want these provisions to move on whatever vehicle is moving next. I'm going to hit a few of the highlights from what's in the bill. As I said, there are 60 pages devoted to supporting our allies, so I can't touch on everything, but I would like to highlight a few that we're especially passionate about. So the first, it provides a domestic adjustment for our Afghan allies. It is not the same text as the Afghan Adjustment Act, but in effect, it will allow for conditional lawful permanent residency. So our allies that are languishing in a legal limbo, that are having to navigate a really broken asylum system, they are no longer going to have to do that. It will save them a tremendous amount of money in legal costs as they no longer have to navigate the asylum system. So we're very supportive of that. Second big thing that it does, it designates special populations of concern for our close combat allies that served alongside American forces in Afghanistan. So that is Afghan Special Operations Forces, that is female members of the ANSF, to include the brave women who served in the female tactical platoons. It also includes pilots and members of the Special Mission Wing. These were some of our closest allies that served alongside us for 20 years. They fought alongside Tier 1 operators. Supporting them is a national imperative. This bill does not extend them SIV eligibility, but it does designate them as a special population of concern, and it tasks DoD with developing a program in which these members can self-refer for admission to U.S. RAP. We think that is tremendously important and would go a long way to supporting these vital populations. We've worked to try and extend SIV eligibility to them, and although this bill doesn't do that, we think this is a great middle ground that will help them tremendously. The bill does extend SIV eligibility, though, for some distinct populations who are in desperate need of it. Firstly, there is a 1-year requirement for admission to the 1-year work requirement for admission to the Afghan SIV program. It makes sense to have a minimum service requirement for admission to the program, but unfortunately, it's too rigid as it is currently constructed in law. So, as an example, an interpreter that would have served for 330 days, but then was injured in an IED attack, if they could no longer continue their service, they would not be SIV eligible. It's crazy to think that interpreters that fought alongside us, bled alongside American forces, would not be eligible for an SIV because they were injured in the course of their service, but that is the unfortunate reality. This bill would fix that. Secondly, this bill extends SIV eligibility among a program called the 1101 SIV program. It would extend it to a novel population. That population is the parents and siblings of U.S. service members and veterans. So Afghan American service members that have parents still in Afghanistan, or siblings that are still in Afghanistan that are Afghan nationals, those Afghan nationals would now be eligible for an SIV. It's crazy to think that American service members who are often using their skills to target terrorist groups in Afghanistan would allow their parents and their siblings to be at risk of reprisal, but that is the current state of play. Thankfully, this bill would address that and provide them a pathway to safety. Those are just a few of the things that we're incredibly passionate about within this bill. And I can take questions about how these are constructed at the end, but those are some highlights. For state of play, the bill is likely to come up for a procedural vote this afternoon in the Senate. Everything we've seen, both being publicly reported and then in our conversations with members of Congress, it's likely to fail, unfortunately. Now, this is where you come in. It's likely to fail because of political expediency, and yet again, Congress failing to stand with our Afghan allies. Our call to action for you is to reach out to your senators and tell them to support our Afghan allies. If this fails this afternoon, there is a plan B. The plan B includes removing the provisions around the southern border and instead focusing on a pared down supplemental. That pared down supplemental would just look at supporting our allies, those in Ukraine, Israel, and the Western Pacific. However, unfortunately, our SIV legislation is actually in the section around immigration and southern border. We have reached out to members of Congress and encouraged them that should this backup plan happen, we need to stand with our allies. Our Afghan allies are allies from our longest war. They deserve protection. We can't move on to a whole new set of wars without taking care of them first. if we're serious about being a credible partner in the region, we must stand by our allies from our longest war. So that has been our going message. When we're done here, we will push out on our socials a call to action, pro forma kind of message that you can send to your senators. But we would really encourage you, if you want to stand with our Afghan allies, to call your senators, to talk to their offices, and to encourage them to either pass the supplemental as it is currently drafted, or to ensure that a pared down supplemental includes protections for our Afghan allies. With that, I believe that Mike has been taking some questions from the audience. Mike, why don't I kick it over to you? And if you could tee up questions, that would be great.
You bet, Andy. Everyone, your questions are welcome, and there's a Q&A box. I've gotten a couple direct messages, but go ahead and ask your questions in the box. That's fine. So the first question, Andy, is, does this legislation authorize more visas for the Afghan SIV program?
Unfortunately, it does not, Mike. Now, that is something that has been a key element of the Afghan Allies Protection Act. It is 20,000 additional visas that is in the Afghan Allies Protection Act. This legislation would not authorize those. We're optimistic that we're going to be able to get those visas authorized through the fiscal year 2024 appropriations bills. Those are the regular bills, the non-emergency spending. So those are in the Senate's version. We're optimistic that when the Senate and House reconcile differences in those bills, that we'll get those 20,000 visas in. However, the legislation that we're talking about today, the National Security Supplemental Act, does in fact extend the SIV program by 5 years. That's a key element of those additional visas, is extending the program so there's more time for Afghans to apply and to make sure the program doesn't sunset. So this bill that we're talking about does that element of the Afghan Allies Protection Act, which is the extension of the program, but it unfortunately does not include those visas, though I am optimistic we're going to get those in a different piece of legislation this year.
And one of the things that people are interested in, Andrew, are the question of how do they know who their senators are? How do they contact them? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. Let me here in the chat, or actually I think we can drop it in the Q&A. Here is a link, and we'll also push this out on socials. And quite frankly, just using a search engine, if you just Google search, who are my US senators, it'll take you to a senate.gov page. And within there, you enter your state, and all of their contact information for both their DC and state offices will pop up. We encourage you to reach out via email. As I said, after the end of this, we'll push out kind of a pro forma message that you can send them. But throughout this, ensure that you're respectful to your members of Congress and their staff. But tell them, hey, we are serious about this. It is long past time that the Senate and the Congress writ large stand with our Afghan allies.
So another question, Andrew, is please send talking points with follow-ups. And I will call them today. Are there any benefits for SIVs as partial veterans, is the question. Are there any benefits for SIVs as partial veterans in the legislation?
I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. So whoever asked that, if you could help me clarify in the Q&A. But the answer is SIVs receive refugee resettlement benefits as part of being SIVs. So there are benefits there. If the question is, would an SIV that we'll say had served in the Afghan National Army, in addition to their service with the by or on behalf of the U.S., would they get some sort of veterans benefits through this? They would not. The benefits that come from this are if you served in the U.S. Army or the U.S. Marine Corps, or really any of the U.S. service branches, and you're currently serving active duty, or you are a veteran, then there would be eligibility for your family members to receive a SIV through the 1101 program. But there are not, kind of VA benefits or anything like that in the legislation.
Got it. Within this bill, are there any provisions for speeding up COM approval, or if there is any changes, please let us know. And for our guests that don't know what COM approval means, it's the last stage of the application process for an SIV, but Andrew can speak more to that.
The short answer is yes. Yes, it does. Some of the sections in here have greater reporting requirements for the State Department. It additionally has a shall provision, as in the administration has to do this. It's not a choice, but they have to develop a task force that addresses processing of visas to meet the statutory requirement. As many of you know, by statute, SIV should be processed within 9 months. That has never happened through the life of the program. The most recent State Department report had it at 608 days. So yes, this legislation has elements to it that are pushing from Congress to the administration to make faster processing of both chief of mission determination and then faster processing of the SIV program, period.
So the next question is, how will this bill affect former Afghan army officers who entered the U.S. through Mexico undocumented?
So this bill, one, it extends eligibility for our SIVs. This bill does have changes to U.S. asylum law. However, there would still be opportunities for people to claim asylum at ports of entry, and the construction of it for the southern border changes would still allow a certain amount of asylum asylum claims per day between the ports of entry. So for Afghan National Army members that are seeking asylum this way, there would still be ways to do it. Admittedly, it does curtail the point of the legislation is to curtail some southern border migration. However, when you look at all of the very real material benefits for our Afghan SIVs, for our Afghan special operators, for all of the Afghans that are struggling, not in Mexico, but in Central Asia, in Afghanistan, the good far outweighs any risks for southern border.
Thank you, Andy. A related question that we've gotten, not necessarily just through here, but through other channels, is does the U.S.-Afghan legislation include any SIV revision that includes former members of the Afghanistan armed forces that cooperated with NATO for 20 years?
Yes. As I said before, the populations that are affected by this that have not SIV eligibility, but a specific new U.S. RAP mechanism for self-referral include special operators, pilots, FTPs. It also includes individuals that worked in human intelligence, in counterintelligence, in counterterrorism or counter-narcotics work. And it does include senior officials that worked in DoD, either as officers, as enlisted individuals, or as civilians. But it is senior level folks that would have this pathway as well.
Thanks, Andrew. I see that there are 2 hands raised. I don't know if our host is able to actually give them the opportunity to speak. So what I would do is ask if they could put their questions in the chat, and we can answer their questions. One thing that we want to speak to and is we realize this legislation is controversial. But again, for thousands of Afghans having a pathway to legal status in the United States, including thousands of SIVs, it's very key. So I would like to invite those 2 guests that have their hands up to just, if you could put your questions in the chat. And if you can, Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about the timing of what's going to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours?
Yeah. So later this afternoon, the Senate will have that procedural vote on the supplemental bill as it stands right now. So that includes all of the changes to southern border migration. It is very likely that that vote will fail. And then Senator Schumer has indicated, along with Senator McConnell, that the plan B will be to introduce this pared down piece of legislation. There's also been talk that potentially, as part of consideration of just the supplemental as it stands, the non-pared down version, that they're going to open it up for greater amendments and a more open amendment process. That may change the calculus for some of the members that have opposed it. So that vote may actually succeed. We will have more information by later this afternoon as to what, how it's going to move. But this is going to be a very busy week with consideration of this. And, please stay tuned because we'll continue providing updates and current calls to action. But this afternoon should tell us a lot. But today is not the end of the story. Tomorrow, the rest of the week, we'll have, plenty to it as well as we see how this bill could move.
Okay. What about those Afghan interpreters and others who served but don't have their superiors because they no longer serve in the U.S. Army? And for those of you that don't, if you could speak to what that means for the folks that are more lay people.
Absolutely. So as part of the SIV process, you need both a letter of recommendation from a former supervisor and HR verification. Unfortunately, the precipitous collapse of the Afghan government, the quick takeover by the Taliban has made this harder. So for a lot of interpreters that may have served, alongside Americans for 5 or 10 years, unless they have, good connections via Facebook, finding them can be incredibly difficult. We're working on a couple different things. So firstly, there is a program called Project Rabbit, which has tried to help address this with getting HR verification. But one of the other things that we're trying to do is not actually in this bill. It's quite frankly not a legislative matter, but it's something that the administration can do. And we have developed a proposal for the DoD to have an open portal that would allow Afghans to submit their information, to submit details of when they served, where they served, and as much detail as possible, who they served with. So units, times, location, and if they have names as well. And then we're going to have we're going to ask DoD to try and locate those service members, to try and identify them, reach out to them. And then if those service members are amenable to it, connecting them with the Afghans that have been reaching out. That way we can move those letters of recommendation. So that's a proposal that is not covered in this legislation, but one that we're working hard on.
And this is a follow-on, and then I've got some other questions. It says there are some interpreters that worked for the U.S. for years but were terminated. Are they eligible for the SIV program?
It depends. I mean, the short answer is it depends, and I know that's an unsatisfactory answer, but it depends on why they were terminated. As we drew down troops, some of the terminations happened because the contracts were no longer needed because we had a smaller American footprint, so we just fundamentally needed fewer interpreters. If the termination was for cause, then it becomes substantially harder for an SIV. So I think it very much would depend, and would encourage you to reach out to us at info@ for additional kind of help on that. Sorry, info@ is the short way of saying info@nooneleft.org, which is the email address.
Thanks, Andrew. So No One Left Behind is very committed to being bipartisan, and so we the next question is I will go ahead and read it so that Andy can reply. Can this bill be Trump-Miller proofed? How would it work if there was a total Muslim ban, or would it just be slow walked as it was during Trump's term? And this is from a guest.
Okay, so the short answer is the executive branch is required to execute. So if there is a change in administration, whether it is Trump, whether it is a third-party candidate, whether it is whomever, they will have large latitude in how all of these laws are administered. Now, some of the things that we're working on that aren't necessarily part of this, the CARE team, which is responsible at state for Afghan relocations, we think it's a great program, and they've done a great job in improving the SIV program. That's not to say there aren't still plenty of issues that need addressed, but we really are supportive of the CARE team. We've looked at, can we get legislation putting CARE team into statute so that it is a position that exists within statute? That's one of the ways. This bill also would extend the life of the SIV program out through the end of 2029. So it would extend it out through the next presidential administration, whoever that is. However, the executive branch has a big say in how these things are run, and they're, depending on who would be the next president, if we have a change, they would have a large say over how this is done. So, proofing this for another administration, it's not ironclad. It very much will, the efficient processing of SIVs will very much depend on, the executive branch and their commitment to standing by our allies. And No One Left Behind will press the Biden administration, another Trump administration, another third-party administration. Really doesn't matter who's in the executive. We're committed to standing with our allies. So we will continue to push. But no, unfortunately, there is no way to proof legislation from the executive.
Thank you, Andy. Here's a question. Are there provisions in here that apply to Iraq interpreters? Many who have been stuck in Turkey in refugee camps and some that have been deported from Turkey back to Iraq are in danger.
No, the answer is it does not. That's an incredibly important thing. I can tell you that the conversations I have with the board at No One Left Behind, they are pushing me incredibly hard to make sure that we're making progress on Iraqi interpreters. I think we've not seen as much progress as we want with the Afghan program, but we are well aware that the Iraq program has just as many issues. One of the top targets we have is reforming the Iraq SIV program. It's more taken any new SIV applications since September of 2014. So we're looking at ways of, either reinvigorating that program or improving the 1059 program to make sure that we're standing with our Iraqi interpreters and others that serve by or on behalf of the U.S. mission there. The other thing is that's Iraqi. There is not a program for Syrian interpreters. They're at tremendous risk as well. So we're really pushing for an SIV program that is not bound to one specific geography or one specific war. We believe that if you raise your hand and agree to serve with U.S. Armed Forces or in our diplomatic efforts, and you're taking that risk, then there should be an SIV program for you, regardless of where you are, whether it be Iraq, Syria, the Sahel, Yemen, Horn of Africa, Philippines. Really does not matter. You would deserve protection. So that is the thing that I have been charged with as kind of top priority. So the hope is we get this passed. We make the dramatic improvements to the Afghan program, and then we can devote kind of additional resources to making sure we keep our promise to Iraqis and interpreters from other countries as well.
So Andy, can you go ahead and we're caught up on the questions in chat, but I think one of the things our guests would like to know is how can they make a difference in the coming hours? And one guest has asked, what are the actual bill numbers? And so if you could share a little bit about the bill numbers and specifically what they can do,
absolutely,
that would be great.
And apologies here that I'm on my phone. I want to make sure I get the bill number for our for the current supplemental correct here. So I guess firstly, the consistent outreach, hearing from members in the community about the two kind of standing pieces of Afghan legislation, that would be the Afghan Adjustment Act and Afghan Allies Protection Act, really important. So HR 4627 and S 2327 is the Afghan Adjustment Act. And then HR 3808 and Senate Bill 1786 is the Afghan Allies Protection Act. For this bill, apologies here, it is HR 815. So the supplemental is Bill 815. The sections that are of importance to us, which are the ones that cover Afghans, are sections 3331 through 3338. So that's 3331 to 3338. Those are the sections that cover Afghans. So when you reach out, and again, we will send this over socials with our call to action, but it's HR 815 and then those sections there.
Let's just take a few more questions before we wind down. There are two here. Will the supplemental also assist those who had an appeal of their visa application due to denial for missing a response deadline? And I'll let you answer that and then ask the second one.
Yes, it will. So as part of this, one of the sections in here has tasked the State Department with greater response to congressional inquiries. So with issues like that, we can absolutely this task the State Department with being more responsive, so we can do congressional inquiries on those kind of specific issues where you had really for no good reason other than just a missed deadline, denial. This opens up the opportunity to do more to make sure that we're addressing those incorrect denial of COM or of SIV. So yes, it does. It doesn't specifically attack your question, but it does provide resources for us to continue to push the State Department to do right by our allies.
Okay, and then there is another question. Does the supplement assist those former mayoral prosecuting roles who assisted NATO and USAID? I mean, these are very in the weeds questions. So if you could just, if you could answer that one, knowing that the whole audience may not be as familiar with the policy speak in the question.
Yes, I see this is from Bonnie. Bonnie, it does support prosecutors. That's part of the group that received the novel SIV eligibility, or excuse me, not SIV eligibility, apologies, the novel US RAP self-referral. I don't know about mayoral, however. I do not believe so. So yes, those that were involved in prosecuting would be, and happy to, again, if you want to reach out at info@NoOneLeft, we can kind of drill down into who would and would not be covered. But yes, prosecutors would receive that referral.
Great. Thank you for that. And there was a question, I mean, you spoke to this earlier, but what is the status of the Afghan Adjustment Act?
So the Afghan Adjustment Act continues to receive more and more endorsements from both Senate and House members. In the Senate, it now has co-sponsors from the ranking member and chair of Armed Services, the ranking member and chair of Judiciary Committee, the ranking member of Veterans Affairs, and the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the former chairman of the committee. So it is still receiving endorsements in the House. I believe it's now up over 40. All of these are on a very bipartisan way. So for every one Republican, one Democrat joins. Unfortunately, however, it has not moved through committee. Neither the Senate under Senator Durbin nor the House under Rep. Jordan have taken up the bill to have debate or markup. So it's not actually advancing. It's unfortunately not moving through those committees, despite the fact that it continues to add more and more co-sponsors in both the House and Senate.
Okay, great. All right, so it looks like we're almost down to the questions, but I wanted to we have a couple hands raised, and we might have the opportunity to go ahead and answer some questions live. So let me start. Cheryl Taylor, you've had your hand up for a bit.
Hey, Cheryl, you came off mute, but I'm not hearing you yet. Cheryl, if you're transmitting, we unfortunately are not hearing you here.
Okay, let's go on to Cheryl. Can you try right now? Okay. Let's go ahead. Akhtar Ahmadi. Forgive me, I may not be pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah.
Hey, Akhtar, we've got you. If you want to go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, we've got you loud and clear. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Glad to hear contact with you guys. I have submitted for my family the application with you guys after the U.S. leave the country. But finally, I mean, uh, so I mean, the organization, I think it was you guys. I filled up the forum, and then you guys moved them to the Pakistan, and so they are still in there in Pakistan. Is there anything I can do, or I fill up a few times? I receive email, fill up the application. I mean the forum. I did plenty times, but I didn't reach out to anything that will they move to another country or anywhere. But they're in the Pakistan from since uh shut down Afghanistan.
Okay. Yeah. If they've been there for that long now, that's obviously tough. I don't need to tell you how hard it is for Afghans in Pakistan right now, especially with some of the plans that have already happened of deporting Afghans. And so, for specific kind of case questions like this, I took your name down. We'll have our evacuation and resettlement team reach out to you to talk specifically about that case. But I appreciate you tuning in and then asking, and we certainly are committed to doing everything we can to help.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we've got a question from Emily Gottschalk. Emily, I think you should be able to go ahead in just a second here.
Emily, I think you should be able to come off mute.
Okay, yeah. Hi, and congratulations on pronouncing my ridiculous last name right. No one ever does that. I just had a quick question. I'm a mentor for No One Left Behind, and I am absolutely loving it. I had a question. When I call my senators, do you think it would be useful to have my mentee in the room with me? Like, he and I have grown very close. I'm very familiar with his situation, or would it just be too much?
No, I mean, I think so. We have right now just a bias towards time. So sooner is
Okay.
better than later. But if it's one of those where your mentee could be on the phone with you, that's always very impactful. I mean, humanizing why this is important is always instrumental. And so showing that there are, just discussing your experience as a mentor, you clearly have skin in the game. This is not just you calling your member of Congress. This is something that you clearly believe in. And so humanizing it with both of you is great, but just
Okay.
given the time sensitivity, sooner is better than later.
Okay, but if it has to be later, we can still do it.
Oh, 100%. And
Okay.
it's one of those, our kind of standing call to action is, calling your members of Congress, both Senate and House, and telling them to support the Afghan Adjustment Act and Afghan Allies Protection Act. That is unfortunately an evergreen kind of target. So
Yeah.
what we're talking about is a call to action for this specific supplemental. But if it has to be later, those are two things that would encourage you and your mentee to reach out about, because like I said, it's evergreen.
Okay, he's phenomenal and he inspires me. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much for being a mentor, and for anyone else on the call that is interested in being a mentor. We have a lot of recently arrived SIVs that are looking for mentors. Emily made a better pitch than I ever could about why it's impactful, but would encourage you to reach out to us at that info@nooneleft.org and sign up to be a mentor.
Great. So thank you so much, Emily, and glad I captured your last name correctly. We've got one more question and then we're going to close things out. So Cheryl Taylor, we can go ahead and open that up for you.
Hey, Cheryl, we've got you up there. I saw you come off mute. Let's see if we can hear you. Hey, Cheryl, apologies. You're still not coming through on our end here. I see you're off mute, but we're not getting you. Cheryl, I see that you just wrote in the Q&A, can't get audio to work. If you want, please feel free to drop a question in there and happy to take it, a written question.
All right, so everyone, I just want to, Andy's going to watch for that question, but we're going to go ahead and close our webinar. So number one, thank you for joining this webinar. So number one, please contact your members of the Senate, and you can make a difference by calling them. Number two, please watch the socials on No One Left Behind. We have a fairly active LinkedIn presence, and we keep updated there. So you can watch there, and you can also see opportunities to get involved. Number three, as Emily mentioned, we have a mentoring program, and that mentoring program is key to getting these allies into employment and help them integrate into America. You can become a mentor if you decide to, and there's a way to do so by going onto our website, and I believe that the link is Get Involved, but it's definitely there. So I would just like to invite Andy to close things up for us, and just say, like, maybe any final words on what our guests can do as we close out a 45-minute webinar on this bill.
Yeah, no, thank you much, Mike. You know, I really cannot emphasize how important your voices are. You know, Mike and I are here in the DC area. We obviously, you know, have relationships on the Hill and talk to members and their staff, but fundamentally, you know, they know that we are not their constituents. We are, you know, if we're talking to a member from Utah or a senator from Texas, they know that we're, you know, they're not accountable to us as their voters. You guys are, and so you have incredibly powerful voices. So reminding them that at the local level, that you care, that this is an issue of, you know, incredible importance to you, that's just vital. There are so many things out there that are competing for, you know, legislators' attention. You look at whether it be the war in Ukraine, the Israel-Gaza conflict, attacks on ships transiting the Red Sea. There are so many geopolitical challenges out there that are competing for attention. Unfortunately, Afghanistan just is not in the news in the same way that it was 2 years ago. And so for us to make progress, it really is going to take all of you reaching out and pushing your member of Congress and letting them know it's still important, that even though it's not getting the coverage that all of these other conflicts are, and even though there are all these other competing requirements, you know, this is still important to Americans, and we need to stand with our allies. So again, I want to echo what Mike had said and just send my sincerest thanks for everything that you've done, you are doing, and you'll continue to do. And with that, I think we're done.
We're done. Thank you again, everyone. Keep an eye on our socials and stay active. No One Left Behind was actively involved in contributing to the evacuation of 2,500 Afghans last year. We are actively involved in serving Afghans and Iraqis here in the United States. You can become part of that by getting in touch with your senators and getting in touch with members on the Hill, on the House side. And you can also help by getting in touch with us. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your time today for this 45-minute webinar, and we will keep you posted. All the best to all of you.